Hello everybody, my name is Zeke. Welcome to my channel. Today's video is going to be, if you can't tell from the huge gap in my bookshelf, I'm going to be talking about one author, and that author is Octavia E. Butler. Now, I want to talk about Octavia E. Butler because she's one of my favorite authors. I read all of her books last year. The only book I haven't read is one that is no longer available to the public. It was put out of print because she did not like it. And so I think I'm qualified to talk on the subject, and I just want to go through all of her books. I'm going to talk about all of them. I'm going to rate them, or I'm not going to rate, like give a star rating, but I'm going to rank them against each other. And then at the end, I want to talk about where I would start and kind of how I would read them in order, just through my experience and what I think is the best way to do it. And I think the way I read it really worked for me, so I'm just going to talk about that experience. Okay, so Octavia E. Butler, if you don't know, she was a Black science fiction writer who started writing in the 70s and died in 2006. So she was really revolutionary because obviously at the time she was basically the only Black woman sci-fi writer, and so she really revolutionized the genre in a lot of ways, and she was very inventive and wrote a lot of stories that weren't really being told, and also had a lot of Black protagonists, which obviously in the time with all the white male authors were not really being written. So very revolutionary, and also just apart from it just being revolutionary, she's also just an incredible author and has written some of my favorite stories of all time. So first I need to talk about Bloodchild. This is not going to be in like my rating because it's a short story collection, and this short story collection has every short story she's ever released, ever published, and it's really, really good, but I don't really feel like it's fair to like talk about it in comparison to her full-length novels, but it's really good. It's a nice mix of a lot of different things she's talked about in other books, a lot of similar themes, but also just obviously very different because it is in short story form, so you get her telling different types of stories that maybe aren't as focused on plot and are more focused on character. And I just think there's some really interesting concepts that are executed in here, and I would still 100% recommend it, and it's great. So at the bottom of my list, I have the last book she ever released, and this is Fledgling, and this was written in a writing slump while she was writing another one of her series, Earthseed, and this is her vampire book, and it's not necessarily bad, but I think it's just okay, and there's some elements of it that I really don't like. We basically follow this girl, and she's woken up, and she doesn't really remember what's happened, but she discovers that she's actually a middle-aged vampire trapped in a young girl's body, and she just goes through the motions of kind of figuring out what happened, connecting with her community, and experiencing the real world. And it's just kind of a generic-ish concept, and then she does really interesting things with it because, you know, vampire books, you think of like bloodthirsty vampires in the night, blah, 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 and she really does like not do that, but it's just kind of boring, and I think the ending is really anticlimactic. We have like some like trial stuff that happens, and it's fine, it's just not really groundbreaking, and by the time I read this, I had expected a little bit more from her. And also there's some like pseudo-pedophilia stuff in here, which is like not supposed to make you feel comfortable, but still it just was a little off for me, just because I didn't feel like it was really necessary. So I think this is probably my least favorite I've ever read from her. Next up, I want to talk about the Patternist series, or Pattern Master series. I think it's not really or Seed to Harvest. I think it's sold as a collection called Seed to Harvest, and that's because this isn't really, it's kind of a series, but it's not really a series. It takes place in the same world, but these are all fragmentary stories and different tales. They're not all just like sequential, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And I'm gonna talk about them a little bit separately just because of that. So my least favorite, and actually, this is not the publication order. They market this as the first, this is the second, this is the third, this is the fourth. But actually, this was published first. Maybe Wild Seed was published last, I don't know. But it's just it's out of order, and some people say read it publication order. Some people read it chronologically. I read it chronologically, and I think I probably should have read it in publication order. but it's too late for that now. And so my ranking of it is actually reverse chronological order. So my least favorite was Pattern Master. This is like a quest type, journey type situation, and basically the whole world of all four of these books, we have like these telepathic people, and we also have like this like infected group of people that have been infected by this like weird alien virus, and that's really prominent in this. And it's like this kind of journey story, and I just don't think it's very interesting. It's fine, it's nothing special, and I really, like, as a marketed ending, like, it doesn't really feel like an ending, which wasn't her intention, but it just was disappointing to me. And then next is Clay's Arc. This follows a family that kind of gets kidnapped by people who are infected by that virus I was talking about, and it takes place obviously before the events of the fourth book. And this one's gruesome and horrific and disgusting, and it has this kind of horrific element of like, what is this family gonna do if they like try to escape? Like, they're gonna spread this virus, but if they stay put, they're gonna suffer horribly. So this one's vile and disgusting, but it's also kind of just really weird, and I don't really know how to think about this one. It's still good, just not great. And then next, after this point, every single book I'm going to talk about, I love a lot, and I have a lot of feeling for it. The three I just talked about, I still like, but these are like the ones that actually I think make her my favorite author. So then there's Mind of My Mind, and this is the follow-up to Wild Seed, and this is the most like sequel to Wild Seed, and it really does talk about it just really does follow up on the events in Wild Seed, and we get a lot of discussion of community in this one, and it's basically this community of like telepathically powered and linked people kind of building this community and existing as this community, and it really offers really satisfying character arcs for the two main characters from Wild Seed, which I'll talk about now. So Wild Seed definitely is my favorite. It's also the longest, and we follow these two all-powerful beings, Doru and Anyanwu, and they're both, Doru can take the form of other people by basically, he like kills them and takes over their body, and Anyanwu, she can shapeshift, so it's that same kind of idea of shapeshifting, but just two very different versions of it. And Doru has been around longer, and he has this thing where he wants to breed like the perfect race of people based on himself. And once he meets Anyanwu, he kind of wants to incorporate her into that plan. But he's also scared of her, and she's the first person he's been scared of his whole life, because she also doesn't grow old and die. And she's also powerful, and she can heal. So it's this really interesting clash of these two characters. And this book really follows their relationship growing and them going to the New World. And this one's incredible. I think it's one of her most interesting books. It's very strange. You hate Doro, and you really are just stuck following him, and you have to witness all the terrible things he does, like, without remorse. But it's also just this really interesting analysis of these two characters and the way that they butt heads and their different goals and their different how their kind of powers manifest in different ways and what they end up doing with their lives. And so this is definitely my favorite from Pattern Master, and this is one of my favorite books of hers. Next, I want to talk about Kindred, and Kindred is definitely her most popular, and it's incredible, and it's popular for a reason. And this is the only other standalone other than Fledgling, which I talked about earlier. And as a standalone, this is incredible. We follow this woman in the 1970s, and I think 1970s, and she randomly gets transported back to slavery times, and she has to kind of figure out how to survive and what to do and how to stop this from happening, because we basically alternate between the majority of time witnessing her in this terrible situation, and then we go back where she comes back to the real world and like no time has passed, and so she's trying to figure out how to stop it, what to do. And I think something really interesting about this book is the people that she meets in slavery times like are made so much more terrible because of the complexities that we see in them, because they do have very complex relationships with each other, and our main character really does have weird relationships with a lot of the people she meets, because it's a very surreal experience for her. And we just see how this kind of the institution of slavery really twists people to be terrible people, and it's very insidious and it's very wrong, and it's just obviously terrible to read but incredibly done. And as I said, this is popular for reason. Incredible, go read it. Next, I'm going to talk about the first thing I ever read from Octavia Butler, and that's the Xenogenesis or Lilith's Brood series. And I'm not going to talk about this separately like I did for Patternmaster Patternist, because this is, well, it still is like, this is one story, this is one story, this is one story, and we follow different main characters. It's much more linked together, and it's much more consistently about like the single storyline. And so I'll just talk about the plot of Dawn, which is the first book. This book is, I think, my top 2 favorite Octavia Butler books, if not my favorite. And basically we're following this woman from Earth, and Earth has been destroyed. She wakes up on this alien spaceship centuries later, and they've been keeping her and other humans asleep there. And they need her because these aliens basically, in order to reproduce and survive, need to form symbiotic relationships with other species. And so that symbiotic relationship, though, is very invasive, especially for Lilith, who's the main character. And we kind of see her have to struggle between knowing that she doesn't really have a choice, and also the terrible things this will mean for humanity. And will it actually be terrible for humanity? And so we follow throughout the whole series discussions of what it means to be human, community, and just a really interesting analysis of these 2 cultures having to mix and them having to get used to each other. And I really think this first book is the best one, and the other 2 are still great, but this one really introduces that whole situation and really sets up everything that happens afterwards in a really good way that really sets up all the themes that are important throughout the whole story. And adulthood rights and Imago, Imago, I don't know how to say it. I don't want to really talk about them too much because I don't want to spoil what happens in the first one, but just know if you finish the first one, even if it sounds weird that you're switching characters, just read them. They're so good, and they really continue everything that's so great about Dawn, with the explorations of the aliens and the humans and how they have to kind of mingle. And it's just really interesting, and it's so unique, and it's so weird. Nothing I've ever read before. And I think it's really a great summation of what Octavia Butler is and can do. Lastly, I'm going to talk about my favorite Octavia Butler duology, that is Earthseed, and this might be one of my favorite stories ever. Just incredible, incredible, incredible. Changed my life when I read it last summer, and really just made me rethink like everything I've ever known about like what a post-apocalyptic book could be. And I really, after I read Dawn and Xenogenesis, I could not believe that anything would ever surpass that, but this did. And so in this first book, the whole setup for this is it's a post-apocalyptic world, but there was never really an apocalypse. It's just humanity slowly degraded. And the inciting incident of this book is there's an attack on the community that our main character lives in. And so we follow her life leading up to that event, the event itself, and then what comes after, where she kind of goes on this quest and almost like recruits people and starts building a community and around this religion that she creates called Earthseed, which sounds really far-fetched. And in a lot of ways, Earthseed is very weird. Like the actual religion of Earthseed is very strange, but it really does play a role in setting up what the book's trying to say. And like we read little passages from Earthseed, like the doctrine she writes at the start of different chapters, and it really builds this kind of whole idea around this community and really sets up this idea of community and the importance of people working together and people finding their own path in the world, and just really, really interesting way of melding that religion into what's going on. And I also just think that the main character is so strong and such a well-written character that you really feel a lot for as you see everything terrible happen to her on her journey, and it's just great. And then my favorite book is actually the sequel. This is my favorite Octavia Butler book. This really follows a different character, and I don't want to say who it is because it's related to the first book, but it's just continues the story in such a incredible way and adds more nuance and more complexities and more devastating and horrific things happen in this one that really add to the horrifying and horrific things that happened in the first one. And this one also adds like the idea of familial relationships and complex familial relationships, and kind of shows us that the protagonist in the first book was not a perfect person. And I don't know, there's something about this one that really just got to me a lot, and this one is much more depressing than the first one, even though the first one was incredibly depressing, but it ends on a hopeful note. And I wish we'd gotten the third book that she was writing when she died, but we never will. And at least fortunately enough, this does end with a ending. Like, it's not a cliffhanger, like you don't need a third book, but I just find myself wondering what that third book would be, and I wish we had it. Okay, so those are all the Octavia E. Butler books I've read and that are published, except for that one book I talked about that is not in print anymore, which I obviously am not gonna be able to read and don't want to go through the trouble of trying to read. If she doesn't like it, I'm not gonna read it. And I just want to talk quickly about the reading order I would choose. Well, I read Xenogenesis first, but I would actually say read Kindred if you're looking for a standalone, or Earthseed if you're looking to get more complex and deeper delve into her work, because I think they're a little less weird than her other works, and I think they're a good introduction to her, so that you can move on to the weirder stuff. So after that, I would say go for Xenogenesis, and then the Patternist if you want, and then if you want to, Fledgling. But I'd say her most essential things to read are Kindred, Earthseed, and Xenogenesis. And overall, just an incredible author. I read all her books last year, and I already want to reread most of them right now, but I'm not going to do that because I have lots of other things I want to read. But I hope that you got something out of this video. I hope that this inspires you to go pick up some of her books, and that you find a new favorite author yourself, or at least an author that you really like. So thank you so much for watching this video. I try to post videos once a week. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but that's just how it goes. And I will see you in the next one.